This is the Surovikin line, a complex line of defenses developed by Russia since the fall of 2022. Named after General Sergei Surovikin, these defenses include several lines of trenches, vehicle ditches, dragon's teeth, and minefields. All these obstacles exist within pre-sighted artillery range, meaning artillery has already aimed their guns at these positions, ready to rain fire at the first sign of contact. These are the obstacles Ukraine will have to breach successfully if they are to win the war. This is an undertaking that hasn't been witnessed in warfare since World War II, where Allied forces had to assault heavily defended areas across Europe and the Pacific. This would also mark the first such attempt in modern warfare, where drones and smart munitions make the battlefield multiple times more deadly than before. We're going to assess Ukraine's buildup for their counteroffensive, and how they staged the battlefield before discussing how the counteroffensive has gone since. We will then assess the current situation as of the moment of this video's recording, and then assess whether the counteroffensive has been a success so far or not. Please note that this video is only covering the events that have occurred up to the time of recording. It may not include important events that may have happened afterwards that could greatly impact this assessment. In September 2022, Ukrainian forces turned Russian forces across the Dnieper River, liberating Kharkiv city, and drawing the battle lines that we have come to be familiar with throughout 2023. Since then, Russia has been working diligently to develop what's been known as the Surovikin line. Simultaneous to this, Russia launched a fresh offensive in the east towards Bakhmut, and south in Zaporizhia. The assaults in Zaporizhia would fail miserably, with one attack on the town of Vuhledar becoming an infamous disaster. An assessment on this battle is already on my channel. Russia would spend the majority of its combat power focused on the city of Bakhmut, where tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides would be killed or wounded. After several months of fighting, Russia would capture the city of Bakhmut. However, their offensive would end there, with no major shifts in the battle lines beyond the city of Bakhmut. Russia would then undergo some dramatic changes, as the Wagner mutiny would end Russia's ability to use Wagner fighters permanently, a practice that had been useful for bloody battles like what was going on in Bakhmut. More importantly, however, Russia would remove General Surovikin, who had been in charge of Russia's aerospace forces at the time, and was the namesake of the Surovikin line. On the Ukrainian side, the spring and summer of 2023 was time to prepare for its counteroffensive. While the Wagner mutiny had little impact on Ukraine's operational planning, it provided a useful distraction for Ukraine's preparation to some limited extent. Ukraine would ultimately await the return of thousands of troops from training in NATO training centers around Europe. These troops were to return to 12 new fighting brigades outfitted with Western platforms like the Bradley IFV and Leopard 2 MBT. Time, however, would be a challenge in Ukraine's preparation for the counteroffensive. President Zelensky had desired for the counteroffensive to begin in the spring. However, delays in Western weapon systems deliveries and in training programs for Ukrainian troops left Ukraine waiting until summer until it was ready to begin operations. Another costly setback occurred when a leak from the Pentagon revealed classified information on Ukrainian battle plans to the internet, forcing Ukraine to adjust its planning. Even when Ukraine was finally ready to begin operations, it would still have to send brigades that weren't fully modernized, with some brigades having to fight with T-64 tanks and AKM rifles, weapon systems that were used by the Soviet Union in the 1960s and 70s but have since become antiquated. Ukraine would simultaneously launch a more concerted campaign targeting Russian air defense and artillery assets with drones and long-range fires. This campaign has not ended, and has succeeded in taking out high payoff targets like S-300 air defense systems and headquarters buildings. Finally, Ukraine would begin its counteroffensive, though things would not go how most Western analysts and pundits expected. Ukraine began by assaulting the flanks of Bakhmut city, attempting to pin Russian forces in and around the city. After fighting a costly battle through the winter and spring to take Bakhmut, Ukraine assessed that Russia would not give it up easily, and thus, if Ukraine were to attempt to retake it, Russia would surge forces in from other areas along the front line to defend the city. This assumption was what Ukraine would count on, as in the beginning of June, Ukraine would begin to attack south in Zaporizhia, testing the Surovikin line. The fighting in the south along the line proved to be brutal, as Ukrainian forces would have no choice but to assault directly into the well-prepared Russian defenses, finding themselves in minefields, artillery barrages, and ATGM range, often simultaneously. This would slow the rate of attack, as Ukraine would instead opt for a slow, methodical offensive, removing parts of the Surovikin line while also providing support by suppressing Russian artillery and ATGM nests. Overall, Ukraine would launch the counteroffensive with 3 lines of effort: one towards Melitopol, one more general assault along the front line on the border of Zaporizhia and Donetsk oblasts, and one towards Bakhmut. The main line of effort appears to be towards the city of Melitopol, which is a massive logistics node linking Crimea with Donbass. As a minimum objective, President Zelensky stated that the city of Tokmak should be taken, which is also a significant logistics node providing support throughout the front lines in Zaporizhia and Kharkiv oblasts. The challenge here is that Ukraine will have to breach the Surovikin line and exploit that breach before the Russians can reset and create a new line further back. In this event, Ukraine may face less developed defensive lines, but would still face more challenges than if they could just race the Russians to the cities. Both Tokmak and Melitopol are heavily fortified and will require a heavy investment in personnel and material to take, even if the strategy is to simply surround, isolate, and wait out Russian defenders. They would be doing this in the Russian rear area, where Russia could quickly move reinforcements and material to apply significant pressure on Ukrainian forces. Ukraine has had some limited successes around the city of Bakhmut, although the city isn't yet under significant pressure. Ukraine was able to retake dominating ground around the city, which over time puts a strain on Russian defenders to resupply themselves, as they'll now be doing so under direct fire. That said, the Ukrainian aim here is likely just to draw Russian forces away from Zaporizhia and into the fight in Bakhmut, which frees up more room for the main line of effort towards Tokmak. That line of effort saw successes in the late summer, carving out a pocket towards the town of Verbatne, with a small breach of the Surovikin line. As of the time of recording, Ukraine has succeeded in breaching the Surovikin line. However, there isn't a lot of evidence that the breach is significantly large, nor has it been exploited in a way that would cause any kind of breakdown in Russian defenses. While there has been changes in the battle lines, Ukraine has a long way to go before it can threaten Tokmak or any other significant cities in the south. In the east, Ukraine continues to progress and apply pressure around Bakhmut. However, Bakhmut remains under Russian control. Overall, the counteroffensive has moved incredibly slowly and will likely continue for several months before Ukraine can actually begin reaching any of its main objectives. Ukraine's counteroffensive has gone much slower than Western leadership has liked, and even President Zelensky has noted the slow pace. However, rushing the offensive, especially with the complex Russian defense network that they're going up against, would be a colossal mistake. The lead up to the counteroffensive offers some insight to why things have gone slower. It was no secret that a counteroffensive was coming, with speculation and discussions of a potential axis of advance beginning months ahead of the actual start date. This was something Russia no doubt knew and tracked closely, and their preparation for the counteroffensive has evidenced itself on the Surovikin line. While OPSEC is incredibly hard to pull off and may in fact be impossible given the accessibility to information and data for anyone on the internet and the size and scale of an operation like this may have been in fact even sloppier than Russia's buildup prior to the war in February 2022. That said, the Pentagon leaks certainly did not help. The Ukrainian military has stated that it's prepared to continue the counteroffensive through the winter, as according to them, the majority of the fighting is infantry-based. We'll see how effective this is, however. It certainly indicates that the slow pace of the counteroffensive will not change anytime soon. This poses some potential challenges for Ukraine. One of Russia's theories of victory is that it can simply outweight the West. In this case, Russia would dig in and defend until Ukraine loses Western support, cutting it off from the material and financial aid that it's been receiving. Once Ukraine is isolated, Russia could go back on the offensive, forcing Ukraine into a negotiated settlement on Russian terms. With this settlement, the groundwork would be set for Russian information operations to destabilize the Ukrainian political establishment, opening the door for Russian-leaning politicians to go in and, quote, clean up the mess, unquote. This plan can only be beaten by the West simply not giving up its support for Ukraine. And this is something that has already become a politicized issue, especially in the United States. Ukraine may be racing against the clock, and the counteroffensive will have to show signs of significant progress towards ending the war if it's going to convince Western leaders and, more importantly, voters that they should continue to aid Ukraine for the long haul. Efforts by Ukraine to clean up the government of corruption this past year have also helped to increase trust, but the counteroffensive can provide the most tangible results and show that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. This is the real challenge Ukraine is facing with its counteroffensive. All things being equal, Ukraine can fight as long as they want to regain the territory taken by Russia. That said, things are not equal, and Ukraine has to rely on Western aid to keep up with Russia. That aid has made an impact, however it shouldn't be considered indefinite, even if the statements being released today by Western leadership say otherwise. Looking to the future, Ukraine will likely continue its grinding strategy. However, whether weather may become a significant obstacle in exploiting breakthroughs. The fall and spring bring a significant amount of mud throughout Ukraine, and while this was an asset in slowing Russian forces down during their initial assault in early 2022, it could become a double-edged sword, slowing Ukrainian armor rushing to exploit any breaches in the Surovikin line. Keeping the offensive as an infantry-dominant fight, artillery will continue to play a huge factor, and this too plays to Russia's advantage. Ukraine may have to make a decision to pause significant action until the ground freezes, and then again once the ground begins to thaw in the spring and get muddy, and then again once the ground begins to thaw in the spring and get muddy. Those operational pauses do give Ukraine time to reassess their plan and give troops time to rest and refit, but they do the same thing for Russia as well. All the while, the polarized debates in the West on Ukrainian aid will likely continue, and with no progress being made and the general lack of understanding among many Western voters on the nature of the war, Ukraine may face challenges in receiving aid, especially considering the US is entering into an election season in 2024. For a breakdown on US aid to Ukraine thus far, check out this video. If you found this video informative, hit that like button as it really helps this video reach new audiences. Until next time.